There is a piece of paperwork sitting on a desk somewhere right now that no one will sign. It describes a tank, or a shed, or a hangar, or a hold of a ship. It lists a chemical, a tonnage, a temperature, and a recommended action. The recommended action will not happen. The signature line will stay blank. And somewhere between 3 months and 7 years from now, that hangar, or that ship, or that tank will turn into a crater, and the news will use the word accident, and the families will be told it was nobody's fault. My name is Blackwell. I have been pulling these files out of court archives, congressional inquiries, royal commissions, satellite databases, and corporate memos that were never meant to leave a building. And I'm going to tell you something that should not be controversial, but somehow still is. Every major industrial disaster of the last 120 years was predicted in writing. Predicted by an inspector, by an engineer, by a foreman, by a mid-level safety officer who got fired for sending the email. The disaster was not an accident. It was a procurement decision. It was a budget meeting. It was a man in a suit looking at a number and deciding that the number for fixing the problem was bigger than the number for the lawsuit afterward. And being mathematically correct. Tonight I want to walk you through 6 of these. 6 explosions, 6 cities. 3 of them used the exact same chemical, and you are going to watch the same mistake repeat across 114 years and 4 continents. And at the end of it, I want you to ask yourself why anyone is still allowed to store this stuff anywhere near a population center. Because the honest answer is the part that nobody wants to put in the press release. We start in France, Pas-de-Calais, the 10th of March, 1906, 6:30 in the morning. The Courrières mining company operated the largest single coal field in Europe, 10 interconnected pits, 110 kilometers of underground tunnels, 1,800 men working the morning shift across 3 of the deepest galleries. The miners had names like Henri Nenny and Charles Pouveau and Anselme Pouveau and Nemasque. Names that you can still read carved into a small gray monument in the town of Méricourt. Names that nobody outside the Pas-de-Calais will ever say out loud again. Because what happened to them happened in the most efficient way human beings have ever invented to kill working men in large numbers, which is a coal dust explosion in a sealed tunnel 270 meters under the ground. The fire had started 4 days earlier. On the 6th of March, in a gallery called Cécile, a small fire was burning in a vein. The miners knew. The foreman knew. The engineer, Léon Petit, the deputy director, knew. The standard procedure for a small underground fire in 1906 was to seal the gallery off with a brick wall and let it suffocate from lack of oxygen. The Courrières management did not seal it. They did not seal it because sealing a gallery means losing the coal in that gallery, and losing the coal in that gallery means losing money. And the company had just promised the shareholders a record quarter. So instead of sealing, they ventilated. They pushed more air down into Cécile, hoping to smother the fire while keeping the seam productive, which is the equivalent of trying to put out a candle by blowing on it. For 3 days, that fire breathed. It cooked the coal dust along the walls of the tunnel. Coal dust, when it gets fine enough and hot enough, and you mix it with the right amount of oxygen, behaves exactly like gasoline vapor. It does not burn, it detonates. By the morning of the 10th of March, the entire western gallery system of Courrières was a fuel-air bomb that nobody in management had bothered to draw on a chart, because nobody in management had read the report from the foreman of pit number 3, a man named Augustin Salé, who 2 days earlier had written, in his own hand, in the green ledger that is now stored in the Centre Historique Minier in Le Ward, the words, "Gas concentration rising." Men complaining of headaches request immediate evacuation pending sealing of Cécile. The ledger has Salé's signature. It does not have a counter-signature. The line where the deputy director was supposed to sign is blank. At 6:34 in the morning, the fuel-air bomb went off. The blast wave traveled at roughly 1,500 meters per second through the tunnels, through the connecting galleries between the 3 pits, up the ventilation shafts, and out the cage shafts at the surface. At Pit 3 at Maricourt, the cage was just beginning its descent with the new shift. The blast threw the cage back up the shaft and through the headframe roof. Witnesses on the surface said the headframe seemed to inhale, and then the wood and steel and bodies came out of it in a single black geyser. The roof of the engine house, weighing several tons, was thrown 400 meters across the field. A horse that had been pulling a cart of timber at the pit head was found later, intact, on the roof of a farmhouse 2 kilometers away. No one ever explained how. Underground, 1,100 men were already dead by the time the blast wave finished its run. Most never knew. The lucky ones died from the pressure pulse before the flames reached them. The unlucky ones died from carbon monoxide as the fire sucked oxygen out of every connected gallery for the next 12 hours. 1,100 men. The official toll was 1,199, then revised down to 1,099, then revised again. To this day, the exact number is uncertain because the company did not keep accurate records of which subcontracted workers were underground that morning. Subcontracted workers in 1906 in northern France meant Polish migrants, Belgian miners, and boys, because the company was paying boys of 13 and 14 as half men and listing them in a separate ledger that has since vanished. The rescue was a catastrophe layered on top of a catastrophe. The Courrières company had no organized mine rescue team because mine rescue teams cost money and the regulations did not require them. They sent volunteers down with handheld lamps. The lamps lit the residual methane. 3 more explosions happened during the rescue effort over the next 16 hours. By the end of the second day, the company simply ordered the surviving entrances sealed. 800 men were known to still be unaccounted for. Some of them were almost certainly still alive. The decision to seal was made by the director on the basis that further rescue attempts were uneconomical. And then, 20 days later, on the 30th of March, 13 men walked out. Their names were Anselme Prouvost, Honoré Couplet, Charles Prouvost, Eugène Berton, Antoine Dussault, Henri Bousmar, Florent Pennon, Eustache Sancourt, Eugène Coudray, Antoine Liebeux, Charles Gonsin, Émile Bréant, and one boy of 14, Charles Nenny. They had survived in a sealed pocket of the gallery by eating a dead horse, drinking water that dripped from the ceiling, and burning their wooden shoes for light when their lamps ran out. They walked themselves to the surface, by themselves, 20 days after the world had given them up for dead. The local press called them the Lazarus Group. A 14th man, Auguste Berthoud, was found alive 4 days later, on the 4th of April, 25 days after the blast. He was so weak he could not speak. He died in hospital 6 weeks later from infections that started while he was still underground. The Lazarus Group walked out, and the company's first reaction was suspicion. The director suggested publicly that the men had been hiding to avoid work and had emerged only when their food ran out. He used the word desertion. The northern French miners, who were already organizing, heard this, and Pas-de-Calais turned into something close to civil war for the next 90 days. 60,000 miners struck. The French government sent 20,000 troops to Lens. Cavalry charged strikers in the streets of Maricourt. Léon Blum, who would later be prime minister, came north as a young lawyer to defend arrested miners. The strike was eventually broken with arrests and starvation, the way mining strikes are always broken. The judicial inquiry took 18 months. It found no individual criminally responsible. The deputy director who had refused to sign Saleh's evacuation order was reassigned to a quieter pit. The director who had ordered the seal at the 800 missing mark received a small fine and kept his position. Foreman Augustin Saleh, the man whose signed ledger entry would have saved 1,000 lives if anybody had read it, was killed in the original blast. His ledger was filed in a wooden box in the Compagnie des Mines de Courrières headquarters and forgotten for 58 years, until a French historian named Diane Cooper Richet, working on a doctoral thesis on the Compagnie des Mines de Courrières, opened that wooden box in 1964 and found the green ledger with Salé's signature on it. She published the find in 1973. By that time, every man in the management chain who could have signed the counter order was dead of old age in a comfortable bed, and the company itself had been nationalized, broken up, and absorbed into Charbonnage de France, which meant there was no longer any legal entity left to sue. The state apologized in a single paragraph in 1998. The apology did not name a single director. The same shaft, pit number 3 at Méricourt, was reopened on the 18th of April, 1906. 39 days after the explosion, same ventilation system, same management. The men who went back down were not the men who had walked out of the Lazarus pocket. Those men never went underground again. One of them, Charles Prouvost, was photographed on the day he came up. He is 41 years old in the photograph. He looks 70. He died in 1919 of what the death certificate calls pulmonary insufficiency, which is the polite French term for what coal dust does to a lung over 13 years. 1,100 dead. 1 ledger entry unsigned. 0 convictions. Now hold that pattern in your head, because we are about to see it again, in a harbor, 11 years later, on the other side of the Atlantic. And this time, the chemical is not coal dust. This time, it is something the French had only just started to mass produce for trench warfare. Picric acid, TNT, benzol, and a Norwegian neutral cargo ship steaming the wrong way up a narrow channel at 8 knots in the wrong lane. Halifax, Nova Scotia, the 6th of December, 1917. 9:04 and 35 seconds in the morning, and the man whose job it was to prevent exactly this collision, the harbor pilot, Francis Mackey, had warned the Royal Navy authorities in writing 3 months earlier that the unescorted munitions ship procedure was, quote, an invitation to catastrophe. His letter is in the Nova Scotia archives. The signature line for the response from the Naval Examination Officer is, of course, blank. The SS Mont Blanc was a French freighter loaded in New York Harbor between the 25th of November and the 1st of December 1917 by stevedores who did not speak French, and a captain, Aimé Lemedec, who did not speak English. Her manifest was the manifest of a floating bomb, and the men loading her did not know it. 2,200 tons of wet picric acid in the lower holds, 200 tons of TNT in the middle holds, 10 tons of gun cotton. And on the deck, in steel drums lashed with rope, 35 tons of high-octane benzol fuel, because the holds were already full and the French army needed the benzol in Bordeaux. The drums were stacked 4 high, lashed to the railings. Lemedec protested the deck loading in writing to the New York Port Authority. The protest was filed. The signature line for approval to remove the drums is blank. She left New York on the 1st of December, alone, because the convoy that was supposed to escort her to Bordeaux had already departed, and the next one was not assembling for 10 days. She was ordered to proceed up the coast to Halifax and join the next convoy at Bedford Basin. She arrived at the mouth of Halifax Harbor on the evening of the 5th of December and was held outside the anti-submarine nets overnight because the nets closed at sunset. She was not flying the red flag that International Maritime Convention required for a vessel carrying explosives. She was not flying it because the captain had been ordered by French naval intelligence not to advertise her cargo to any U-boat that might be observing the harbor approaches. So a ship carrying 2,900 tons of high explosive entered one of the busiest wartime harbors in the world, disguised as an ordinary tramp freighter. At 7:30 in the morning on the 6th of December, the nets opened. Mont Blanc began her run up the harbor at the legal speed of 4 knots. She was in the correct lane on the Dartmouth side of the channel, the eastern lane, headed north toward Bedford Basin. Coming the other way, headed south, out of the basin and toward the open sea, was the SS Imo, a Norwegian relief ship under charter to the Belgian Relief Commission, empty, riding high, carrying nothing but ballast water. Emo was running late. She had missed her departure window the previous evening because her coal had not arrived. Her captain, Hakon Frum, was trying to make up time. He was running at 7 knots, almost twice the legal harbor speed. And he was, for reasons that the inquiry was never able to fully resolve, in the wrong lane. He was on the Dartmouth side. He was on the side where Mont Blanc was supposed to be. The two ships saw each other at a distance of about 1,200 meters in the narrowest part of the channel, a stretch called the Narrows, where the harbor pinches down to less than 500 meters wide. Mackie, the pilot on Mont Blanc, sounded one short blast on the whistle, which under maritime rules means I am holding my course on my correct side, you must yield. Emo replied with 2 short blasts, which means I am turning to my port, my left, which would have taken her further into the wrong lane and directly across Mont Blanc's bow. Mackie, in a decision that the inquiry would later spend 150 pages debating, ordered Mont Blanc to also turn to port, hoping to thread Emo's stern. Emo at that moment reversed engines to slow down. The reversed propeller, on a high-riding empty ship, swung Emo's bow back to starboard, which was now into Mont Blanc's path. The two ships kissed at almost 0 relative speed, just hard enough for Emo's prow to break open 3 of the deck-stacked benzol drums on Mont Blanc. The benzol ran down across the picric acid hatch covers. Sparks from the steel-on-steel contact at the moment of impact ignited the benzol vapor. Mont Blanc was on fire on her foredeck within 7 seconds. Captain Limedec gave one order. He ordered the entire crew of Mont Blanc into the lifeboats. He did not order them to flood the holds. He did not order them to scuttle the ship. He did not have the time, and frankly, he did not have the option, because the firefighting equipment on Mont Blanc was a single hand pump and 3 buckets, and the burning benzol was already pooling against the hatch coamings of a hold containing 2,200 tons of picric acid. Picric acid, when it cooks, does not burn. It detonates at roughly the same energy yield as TNT. Limedec and his 40 crew rowed for the Dartmouth shore as fast as 40 terrified Frenchmen can row. They were screaming warnings in French at the people on the Dartmouth pier. The people on the Dartmouth pier did not speak French. They thought the sailors were panicking about a normal ship fire. A burning ship in a harbor in 1917 was a spectacle, not a threat. The pier, the streets, the windows of every house facing the harbor, filled with people coming out to watch the fire. Mont Blanc, now abandoned and burning, drifted on the current toward the Halifax shore. She came to rest, gently, against Pier 6 in the Richmond district, the working-class north end of the city, a neighborhood of wooden tenement housing, the sugar refinery, the cotton mill, and the railway terminal. She set the wooden pier on fire. The Halifax Fire Department arrived at 9:01 with 2 horse-drawn pumpers and the city's only motorized fire engine, the Patricia. 8 firefighters dismounted and began to run hose toward the burning ship. None of them knew what was in the hold. None of them had been told. The harbor master had not been told. The Port Authority log for that morning lists Mont Blanc as a tramp freighter, cargo unspecified, because Limedec, on entering the harbor, had given the cargo manifest to the Naval Examination Officer in a sealed envelope marked Secret, and the envelope was still sealed in a desk drawer at the Royal Navy office 2 miles away when the firefighters started spraying water on a hold full of picric acid. At 9:04 and 35 seconds, 26 minutes after the collision, Mont Blanc detonated. The blast was, until the morning of the 6th of August, 1945, the largest man-made explosion in the history of the world. 2,900 tons of mixed high explosive going off in a single instant produced a yield that modern blast forensics calculates at 2.9 kilotons of TNT equivalent, 20% of the energy of the Hiroshima device, in a city center with no warning. The shockwave traveled at slightly over 10,000 kilometers per hour for the first 200 meters, and decayed to about 1,000 kilometers per hour by the time it reached the outer edges of the city. Every window within 16 kilometers shattered. The Mont Blanc itself ceased to exist as a physical object. The largest piece of her ever recovered was the shank of her port anchor, weighing 520 kilograms, which was found 3.9 kilometers across the harbor in the suburb of Armdale, embedded in the trunk of an oak tree. It is still there today, set into a small concrete monument. Because nobody could think of how to remove it without cutting the tree down. The barrel of one of her 4-inch deck cannons traveled 5.6 kilometers in the opposite direction and landed in a small lake near the suburb of Albro. The lake was renamed Anchor Lake, then renamed back, then renamed again in 1967 when a museum took the gun barrel away. The Richmond district, where the firefighters had been running hoses 30 seconds earlier, ceased to exist. The blast wave, the thermal pulse, and the subsequent tsunami, because 2.5 kilotons going off in shallow water generates a tsunami of about 18 meters at the closest shoreline, wiped Richmond flat in approximately 40 seconds. 1,782 people were killed. Approximately 1,600 of them died in the first 40 seconds. The remainder died in the days that followed, of burns, of crush injuries, and of exposure. Because at 5 o'clock that afternoon, a blizzard descended on Halifax that dropped 40 centimeters of snow in 16 hours on a city that no longer had roofs. 9,000 were wounded. 200 lost their eyesight permanently from flying glass. The Halifax explosion is the reason that modern ophthalmology developed the standardized protocols for mass casualty eye trauma, because the survivors created a class of blind patients so large that the discipline had to invent itself to treat them. The Sir Frederick Fraser School for the Blind in Halifax expanded its enrollment by 800% over the next 2 years. The 8 firefighters of the Patricia were vaporized. 7 of the 8 bodies were never recovered. The 8th was identified by the brass buckle of his belt, found in a tree. And then there was Vince Coleman. Vincent Coleman was 45 years old, a railway telegrapher for the Canadian Government Railways, working the Richmond station at the corner of Russell and North Streets, 400 meters from where Mont Blanc was about to blow. A sailor from Mont Blanc, one of the lifeboat survivors who had landed at Dartmouth, had run, soaking wet, across the railway bridge, screaming in broken English about the cargo. The sailor reached the Richmond railway station at approximately 9:03. He told Coleman and Coleman's supervisor, William Lovett, that the burning ship was full of explosives and was going to detonate within minutes. Lovett ran out to evacuate the rail yard. Coleman started to run with him, then stopped. Coleman knew that the morning passenger train number 10 from St. John, New Brunswick, with 300 passengers aboard, was due into Richmond Station in 6 minutes. He turned around. He sat back down at his telegraph key, and he sent, in continuous Morse, the following message to every station up the line. Hold up the train. Ammunition ship afire in harbor, making for Pier 6 and will explode. Guess this will be my last message. Goodbye, boys. The message was received and acknowledged by Truro, 60 miles up the line, at 9:04 and 20 seconds. Train number 10 was halted at Rockingham Station, 4 miles short of Richmond. All 300 passengers survived. Coleman did not. The blast hit his station at 9:04 and 35 seconds. His body was found 2 days later in the rubble, still seated, the telegraph key under his right hand. He had stayed at his post for 90 seconds after he knew he was a dead man, to save 300 strangers he had never met. There is a statue of him at the Halifax-Dartmouth ferry terminal. The plaque does not name the harbor master who never opened the manifest envelope. It does not name Captain Frum of the Emo, who survived and went home to Norway. It does not name the Royal Navy examination officer, whose identity the inquiry redacted from the public record and whose name has never, to this day, been released. The Wreck Commissioner's inquiry of 1918, presided over by Justice Arthur Drysdale, ran for 2 months. It found Captain Lemedec of the Mont Blanc and pilot Francis Mackey criminally negligent. Both men were arrested. Both men were charged with manslaughter. Both cases were thrown out by the Supreme Court of Canada on appeal in 1919. The Supreme Court ruled that no individual could be held criminally responsible for a collision caused by the simultaneous failures of harbor traffic regulation, naval secrecy protocol, and ship handling judgment. The court did not say which of those three categories applied to which person. It did not need to. The political pressure from the French government, which did not want its captain hanged, and from the Norwegian government, whose captain was already dead, Håkon From had been killed when Emo was thrown ashore at Dartmouth, and from the Royal Navy, which did not want the secrecy protocol questioned during wartime, all converged on the same convenient verdict, which was nobody's fault. Lemedec went home to France. He retired in 1922 on full pension. He died in 1931 in his house in Nantes in his bed. Francis Mackey, the pilot, was barred from the harbor for 2 years and then quietly reinstated. He worked as a Halifax pilot until 1938. He died in 1961, aged 88, also in his bed, in a house overlooking the harbor where 1,700 people had been incinerated on his watch. 1,782 dead, 1 sealed envelope, 0 convictions. Are you noticing the pattern yet? Because we have done 2 of these, and we are about to do a 3rd, and this one is going to introduce a new chemical, and the new chemical is going to come back to haunt us in 3 more episodes, in 3 more cities, on 3 more continents, across the next 99 years. So pay attention to the name when I say it, because by the end of this video, you are going to want to know why anyone, anywhere, is still allowed to keep this stuff in a building near other human beings. Germany, 21st of September, 1921. 7:32 in the morning. The town of Oppau in the Rhine Valley, just north of Ludwigshafen, in the heart of what was then the largest chemical industrial complex on Earth. The Badische Anilin- und Soda-Fabrik, BASF, and the chemical is called ammonium nitrate. Write that name down, ammonium nitrate. We are going to see it 3 more times tonight. In 1921, BASF was the most technically advanced industrial chemistry company in the world. They had Fritz Haber, they had Carl Bosch, they had won 2 Nobel Prizes between them in the previous decade for the synthesis of atmospheric nitrogen into ammonia, which had quite literally doubled the world's food supply by enabling the mass production of artificial fertilizer. The Haber-Bosch process took nitrogen from the air and hydrogen from steam-reformed coal gas and combined them under 300 atmospheres of pressure at 500 degrees Celsius into liquid ammonia, which was then oxidized to nitric acid and combined with more ammonia to make ammonium nitrate, the most concentrated nitrogen fertilizer ever produced. By 1921, BASF Oppau was producing 450,000 tons of ammonium nitrate per year. They stored it in a single concrete silo, building number 110, which held approximately 4,500 tons at any given moment in a single rectangular pile 20 meters wide, 60 meters long, and 8 meters high. The problem with ammonium nitrate, which Bosch's engineers had identified within the first year of mass production, but which BASF management had decided was a manageable production problem rather than a safety issue, was that the stuff cakes. Ammonium nitrate is hygroscopic. It absorbs water from humid air. When it absorbs water and then dries again, it crystallizes into a solid mass. A pile of 4,500 tons of fertilizer sitting in a concrete silo for several months in the humid Rhine Valley becomes, over time, a single 4,500-ton block of rock. You cannot shovel it. You cannot scoop it. You cannot run it down a conveyor. You have to break it up. BASF's solution to this engineering problem, beginning in 1920, was to break up the caked piles with small charges of dynamite. They drilled boreholes into the surface of the caked pile, inserted small 200-gram charges of dynamite, and detonated. The resulting fragmentation could then be shoveled and bagged. The procedure had been performed by 1921 somewhere between 16,000 and 20,000 times across the various BASF facilities. It had never resulted in a detonation of the parent pile. The internal BASF safety memo, signed by Chief Engineer Wilhelm Krau on the 11th of June 1920, stated that the procedure was, quote, demonstrably safe under all observed conditions of mixed ammonium sulfate nitrate at the standard 50-50 ratio. The standard 50-50 ratio. That is the sentence I want you to listen to, because in the spring of 1921, BASF had a supply problem. The Treaty of Versailles had cut off German access to Chilean sodium nitrate. The price of ammonium sulfate, the safe diluent that they mixed with ammonium nitrate to keep the storage pile non-explosive, had tripled. So BASF management, in a meeting on the 14th of April 1921, the minutes of which survived in the Ludwigshafen archives because a junior secretary kept a personal copy, decided to reduce the ammonium sulfate ratio in the Oppau silo from 50% down to 40%. And then, in a follow-up meeting on the 30th of June, down again to roughly 55% ammonium nitrate by mass. And then, in August, depending on which incoming shipment of sulfate had arrived that week, the ratio drifted as high as 75% ammonium nitrate in some sections of the pile. Nobody told the blasting crew. The blasting crew on the morning of the 21st of September, 1921, was using the same procedure they had used 20,000 times. 200 grams of dynamite per borehole. Standard depth, standard pattern. They were going to blast loose about 50 tons of caked fertilizer for the morning's bagging shift. The lead foreman, a man named Heinrich Stranzel, fired the charges at 7:32 in the morning. The first charge initiated. The second charge initiated. And then the entire 4,500-ton block, which was no longer a 50-50 mixture, but a 60% ammonium nitrate detonable mass, sympathetically detonated. The yield was approximately 1 to 2 kilotons of TNT equivalent. The crater was 90 meters wide, 125 meters long, and 19 meters deep. The explosion was heard in Munich, 300 kilometers away. In Frankfurt, 80 kilometers away, the windows blew in across the entire city center. The town of Oppau, which had a population of about 6,500, lost 80% of its housing stock in the same 40 seconds it took the blast wave to clear the residential zone. 561 people died, including the entire blasting crew, the entire bagging crew, and most of the residents of the streets directly south of the silo. 2,000 were injured. 7,500 were left homeless. The internal BASF investigation, conducted in October of 1921, identified the cause within 3 weeks. The ratio change had not been communicated to the Safety Engineering Department. The blasting procedure that had been certified safe at 50-50 was now being applied to a mixture that crossed the detonation threshold somewhere between 60 and 65% ammonium nitrate. The board meeting that had authorized the ratio change was minuted. The signatures on the minutes included Karl Bosch himself, the Nobel laureate, the director of the company. The German Public Inquiry of 1922 received the BASF internal report in heavily redacted form. The redactions removed the meeting minutes. The official cause of the disaster was listed as, quote, an unforeseen variation in the chemical behavior of the stored material. Bosch was not charged. No one at BASF was charged. The plant was rebuilt. Production of ammonium nitrate resumed at Oppau in 1923. The same chemistry, different building number. The new silo, Building 115, was constructed with reinforced blast walls and a maximum storage limit of 1,000 tons, a quarter of the original. That limit was exceeded by 1926. By 1930, Oppau was again storing 4,500 tons of ammonium nitrate in a single facility. 561 dead, 1 ratio change, 0 convictions. And here is the part that makes me want to throw something through a wall. The Oppau report, the internal BASF document with the meeting minutes attached, was circulated as a confidential safety bulletin to every major chemical company in the world in 1922. It was translated into English. It was sent to DuPont. It was sent to Imperial Chemical Industries. It was sent to the United States Bureau of Mines. It described, in technical detail, the exact storage conditions under which ammonium nitrate becomes a detonable mass, the exact ratio thresholds, the exact contamination conditions to avoid. Every chemical engineer in the Western world, by 1923, knew what ammonium nitrate could do. 26 years later, the Bureau of Mines Bulletin was still on the shelf, in a filing cabinet, at the United States Coast Guard office in Galveston, Texas, when a French Liberty ship called the SS Grand Camp began loading 2,200 tons of ammonium nitrate fertilizer at the dock in Texas City, Texas, on the 11th of April, 1947. The fertilizer was American-made. It was being loaded for shipment to France as part of the Marshall Plan agricultural aid package to help rebuild European farming after the war. The bags were paper. The hold was wooden-floored. The temperature in the Gulf Coast hold by the morning of the 16th of April was approximately 32 degrees Celsius, and rising. The Grand Camp was a Liberty ship, one of those mass-produced wartime cargo vessels the Americans had been welding together at the rate of 3 hulls a day in 1943. She was 2,700 tons displacement, 441 feet long, and she had been transferred to the French government in 1946 as part of the European reconstruction package. Her captain on this voyage was Charles de Guillabon. Her cargo, in addition to the 2,200 tons of ammonium nitrate fertilizer in the lower holds, included 16 cases of small arms ammunition, 120 bales of sisal twine, 9,000 bags of peanuts, some agricultural machinery, and 1,200 tons of additional ammonium nitrate in the upper hold, which had been loaded the previous day and which was, at the moment loading resumed on the morning of the 16th of April, still in the process of being topped off. The fertilizer was not pure ammonium nitrate. It was what the manufacturer, the Lion Oil Company of El Dorado, Arkansas, marketed under the trade name FGAN, fertilizer-grade ammonium nitrate, which was a small modification of the basic chemistry intended specifically to reduce caking and improve handling. Pure ammonium nitrate, the same stuff that had blown a 100-meter hole in BASF Oppau 26 years earlier, was coated in the Lion Oil process with about 1% paraffin wax and 1% rosin. The paraffin and rosin were added to keep the granules from absorbing moisture and clumping. The paraffin and rosin were also, as it happens, organic hydrocarbons, which is to say, fuel. The Bureau of Mines Safety Bulletin of 1923, the one that had been on the shelf in the Coast Guard office in Galveston since the Oppau disaster, had specifically warned that any contamination of ammonium nitrate with organic material, sawdust, paper, oil, wax, lowered the detonation threshold dramatically. The bulletin recommended that contaminated ammonium nitrate not be stored in bulk quantities exceeding 100 tons, and never in wooden-floored holds, and never in temperatures above 25 degrees Celsius, and never, under any circumstances, near sources of ignition. The Grand Camp had a wooden-floored hold. It was being loaded in Texas Gulf heat. The bags were paper, which is to say, organic material in direct contact with every granule. And on the morning of the 16th of April, at approximately 8 o'clock, a longshoreman named Julio Luna, working in hold number 4, lit a cigarette. He testified later, at the federal hearings, that he had been smoking on board the Grand Camp every morning for the previous 5 days, and that nobody had told him not to, and that the captain himself had been smoking on the bridge while the cargo was being loaded. Smoking was not unusual on cargo ships in 1947. The longshoremen, the union men of the Texas City local, had no reason to think they were standing on top of a bomb. The bags said fertilizer. They smelled vaguely of ammonia. The men joked about them. The men sat on them during their breaks. Luna's cigarette is the most likely source of ignition, but it was never definitively confirmed because Luna was killed at 9:12 that morning, along with everyone else within 400 meters of the dock. What is confirmed is that at approximately 8 o'clock in the morning, smoke was observed rising from between the bags in hold number 4. The smoke was reported to the second mate, who reported it to the chief mate, who reported it to Captain de Guillabon, who came down from the bridge at approximately 8:15 to investigate. De Guillabon's response is the moment in this story that I want you to remember, because it is the textbook example of a captain who knew exactly enough chemistry to kill himself and 700 other people. He ordered the hold sealed. He ordered the hatch covers closed and battened down. He ordered the ventilation shut. He ordered steam from the ship's boilers piped into the hold to smother the fire. He did this because the standard procedure for a fire in a cargo hold containing flammable but not explosive material, coal, cotton, grain, is to deprive the fire of oxygen by sealing the space and flooding it with steam or carbon dioxide. This procedure, applied to a fire involving organic contaminated ammonium nitrate, is the precise procedure required to convert a small surface fire into a confined space deflagration into a full detonation. The steam raised the internal hold temperature past 200 degrees Celsius. The sealing prevented the gaseous decomposition products of the fertilizer from venting. The pressure inside the hold rose. The temperature rose. The decomposition went exothermic, and the paraffin and rosin coatings on the granules began to feed the reaction. By 8:45, the hatch covers were glowing red. The paint on the deck above hold 4 was blistering. By 9 o'clock, the hold was, in the words of one surviving witness, screaming, a high-pitched whistling sound from the steam venting through the hatch combings. By 9:05, the smoke coming out of the ship was bright orange, which is the characteristic color of nitrogen dioxide, which is the characteristic decomposition product of ammonium nitrate going thermal runaway. The Texas City Fire Department arrived at 9:06, 28 men, 4 trucks. They began rigging hoses to the dockside. Captain de Guillabon, on the bridge, was screaming at the dock workers in French to evacuate. The dock workers, who did not speak French, interpreted his shouting as instructions to direct the fire trucks toward the burning ship. A crowd of approximately 200 spectators gathered on the warehouse rooftops adjacent to the dock to watch the fire. School children on the playground at Danforth Elementary, 4 blocks away, ran to the chain-link fence to look at the orange smoke. At 9:12, the SS Grand Camp detonated. The blast was approximately 2.7 kilotons, comparable to the Halifax explosion 30 years earlier, and within 10% of the Oppau yield. The Grand Camp's anchor, weighing 1,530 kilograms, was thrown 1.5 miles inland and embedded itself in the parking lot of the Pan American refinery. It is still there, set into a concrete monument, because, like the Halifax anchor in the oak tree, no one could think of how to move it. The entire 28-man Texas City Fire Department was wiped out at 9:12. Every single firefighter on duty that morning died. The volunteer fire department from the neighboring town of Texas City Heights, which had been called in as backup, lost 12 more men. The combined Texas City Fire Service ceased to exist as an institution at 9:12 and 40 seconds in the morning. It would not be reconstituted for 14 months, during which the city had no fire protection at all. 581 people died in the initial blast. The thermal pulse set fire to the Monsanto chemical plant directly across the slip, which produced styrene and polystyrene, and the Monsanto plant began burning, sending up a second column of black smoke. The blast wave rolled through the residential neighborhoods of Texas City, collapsing roofs, blowing out walls, and igniting hundreds of secondary fires. The Texas City refinery, the Republic Oil refinery, and the Stone Oil refinery all caught fire from flying debris. Within 30 minutes, the entire industrial waterfront of Texas City was burning. And then there was the high flyer. The SS Highflyer was another Liberty ship, moored about 200 meters from the Grand Camp on the other side of the dock, also carrying ammonium nitrate fertilizer, approximately 960 tons of it, plus 2,000 tons of sulfur in her forward holds. She had been damaged by the Grand Camp blast. Her hull was punctured. Her superstructure was on fire. Her crew had abandoned her at 9:15, 3 minutes after the Grand Camp went up. The Coast Guard, the Texas City Harbor Master, and what was left of the local emergency response coordinated through the day on the question of what to do with the High Flyer. They decided to tow her out of the harbor. The decision to tow her was made at approximately 3 in the afternoon. The tugboat that was supposed to do the towing arrived at 6 in the evening. The tug crew attempted to attach lines to the High Flyer for approximately 5 hours, working in heavy smoke, with the sulfur in the forward holds now burning and producing sulfur dioxide so dense that the tug crew had to wear gas masks. They could not get a line on her. At 11 in the evening, they gave up and returned to shore. At 1:10 in the morning of the 17th of April, 16 hours after the Grand Camp explosion, the High Flyer detonated. The second blast was smaller than the first, about 1 kiloton, but it occurred in the city that was already on fire, with rescue operations underway, with hundreds of volunteers and Red Cross workers and out-of-town firefighters now in the disaster zone. The second blast killed an additional 28 people whose names had been added to the rescuer rolls during the day and wounded approximately 200 more. It also obliterated what remained of the Monsanto plant, which had been smoldering, and set fire to the Humble oil refinery, which had been spared by the first blast. The combined Grand Camp High Flyer disaster killed at least 581 people, with somewhere between 100 and 300 additional deaths from injuries in the following weeks. The exact toll has never been established because the fire was so intense in the dock area that an unknown number of longshoremen and visiting seamen were never identified. 63 bodies were buried in a mass grave in the Texas City Memorial Cemetery without identification. They are still there, unnamed. The federal investigation, the Texas City Disaster Hearings of 1948, took testimony for 14 months. The hearings established, beyond reasonable dispute, the following facts. 1. The Bureau of Mines Bulletin warning of the explosive properties of contaminated ammonium nitrate had been on file at the Coast Guard office in Galveston since 1923. 2. The Lion Oil Company had been informed by its own chemists in a memo dated the 8th of November 1946 that the paraffin rosin coating on FGAN reduced the detonation threshold and that bulk shipment in paper bags in tropical conditions was, quote, contraindicated. 3. The captain of the Grand Camp had been provided no documentation regarding the explosive properties of his cargo because the bagging plant had not been provided that documentation either. 4. Smoking on the deck and in the holds of an American vessel loaded with ammonium nitrate fertilizer was, in 1947, not prohibited by any federal regulation. The hearings ended in 1948 without recommending criminal charges against anyone. The federal government was sued by the survivors in a class action that became known as Daylight versus the United States, which went to the Supreme Court in 1953. The Supreme Court ruled 6-3 that the United States government could not be held liable for damages arising from the manufacture, packaging, or shipment of FGAN fertilizer, because the production of FGAN had been authorized by Congress as a discretionary function of executive policy, and discretionary functions were exempt from tort liability under the Federal Tort Claims Act. Justice Robert Jackson wrote the dissent. He said, in a sentence that I would like every regulator and every corporate counsel in America to read once a year for the rest of their lives, the following. This is a day that will live in juristic infamy. The court today permits a sovereign to escape responsibility for a catastrophe that its own agencies created, on the too poor to enforce its own laws and too desperate for foreign investment to ask the questions it should have been asking. Bhopal, the capital of the state of Madhya Pradesh in central India. In 1969, when the Union Carbide Corporation of Danbury, Connecticut, broke ground on a pesticide plant in the Jayaprakash Nagar industrial zone north of the Old City, Bhopal had a population of about 400,000. By the 2nd of December 1984, that population was approaching 900,000, and roughly 200,000 of them, the poorest of the poor, the rural migrants, the day laborers, the rickshaw pullers, the night soil collectors, the children, lived in the unauthorized slum settlements of Jayaprakash Nagar and Kazi Camp, directly downwind of the plant, separated from the perimeter fence by a single dirt road, and, in some places, by nothing at all. The plant produced a pesticide called 7, which was Union Carbide's brand name for the chemical carbaryl, a carbamate insecticide widely used on cotton crops. Carbaryl is not, in itself, particularly dangerous. The problem with 7 was the precursor chemistry. To make carbaryl, you have to make methyl isocyanate first. Methyl isocyanate, MIC, is one of the most acutely toxic industrial chemicals ever produced at scale. It boils at 39 degrees Celsius. It reacts violently with water. It is heavier than air. The threshold for permanent lung damage in humans is roughly 0.4 parts per million. The threshold for death within an hour, depending on body weight, is somewhere between 2 and 20 parts per million. Union Carbide's own internal toxicology bulletin, dated 1976, described MIC as, quote, extraordinarily hazardous, and recommending storage only in small quantities, refrigerated, with double containment, in facilities geographically isolated from population centers. The Bhopal plant stored 63 tons of methyl isocyanate in 3 above-ground tanks designated E610, E611, and E619. The tanks were not double-contained. The refrigeration unit on tank E610 had been switched off to save electricity costs on the 10th of June 1984, 6 months before the disaster. The flare tower, designed to burn off any vented MIC, had been disconnected for maintenance on the 2nd of October and never reconnected. The vent gas scrubber, designed to neutralize escaping MIC with caustic soda, had been switched to standby mode on the 22nd of October. With a malfunctioning circulation pump that had been on the maintenance backlog since August. The water curtain, the last line of defense, designed to spray water into any escaping vapor cloud, had a maximum spray height of about 13 meters. The ruptured pressure relief valve on tank E610 was 33 meters above the ground. Every single safety system at the Bhopal plant on the night of the 2nd of December 1984 was either turned off, broken, undersized, or under maintenance. This was not the result of a single bad decision. It was the result of a deliberate, documented, 18-month cost reduction program signed off by Union Carbide India Limited's managing director, V.P. Gokhale, and approved in writing by the parent company's operating division in Danbury under a memo dated the 4th of September 1983, titled, with a flatness that I find more obscene than any of the words in our trash glossary, Bhopal Plant Operating Cost Reduction, Phase 2 Implementation. The memo cut the plant's safety staffing from 12 full-time positions to 6. It reduced the operator training program from 6 months to 15 days. It eliminated the requirement that the control room operator on duty during MIC handling speak fluent English, despite the fact that all the safety documentation, all the emergency procedures, and all the alarm placards were written exclusively in English. The new operators were Hindi speakers from the local labor pool. They were paid the equivalent of about $30 per month. They were responsible for a chemical that could kill them and everyone they had ever met within a 30-kilometer radius if they pushed the wrong button. The wrong button was pushed at approximately 10:30 in the evening on the 2nd of December 1984. By a small maintenance crew working on the pipe manifold above tank E610. They had been instructed to flush a section of pipe with water. The standard procedure required them to first insert a slip blind, a steel disc, between the section being flushed and the rest of the system to prevent water from entering any tank. The slip line procedure had been removed from the maintenance manual in August 1984 as part of the cost reduction program. The crew did not insert a slip line. The water they pumped into the manifold flowed through a series of corroded valves that should have been closed, but were not, into tank E610. Methyl isocyanate, on contact with water, undergoes an exothermic hydrolysis reaction. The reaction produces heat. The heat boils more MIC. The boiling MIC produces gas. The gas raises the internal pressure of the tank. The pressure rupture disc on tank E610, rated for 40 pounds per square inch, blew at approximately 23 minutes past midnight on the 3rd of December. Behind the rupture disc was the safety relief valve, which lifted into the vent header, which led to the disconnected flare tower, which led nowhere. 42 tons of methyl isocyanate vapor, at a temperature of approximately 200 degrees Celsius, vented directly into the night air over Bhopal in a continuous stream that lasted between 45 minutes and 2 hours. The wind that night was from the northwest at about 5 kilometers per hour. It was a cool, clear December night. The temperature inversion layer over Bhopal that night, typical of the post-monsoon season in central India, sat at about 40 meters above ground level. The MIC cloud, heavier than air, did not rise. It did not disperse. It rolled, slowly, southeast, along the ground, in a layer between 2 and 6 meters thick, exactly the height of a sleeping human being on a low cot in a tin-roofed shack. Across Jayaprakash Nagar, across Kazi Camp, across the Old City, across the railway station, across the Hamidia Hospital, across the Bhopal Central Market, in a continuous low fog that the survivors would later describe as smelling like burning chilies, like cut onions, like the inside of a paint factory, like nothing they had a word for. Within 20 minutes, the cloud had reached the railway station, where the night station master, Ghulam Dastagir, was on duty supervising the arrival of the Gorakhpur Express at Platform 1. Dastagir's eyes began to burn. He smelled the chilies. He saw, in the platform lights, the layer of fog rolling across the tracks. He understood, with the speed of a man who had grown up in the shadow of the plant and knew what was upwind of him, what he was looking at. He had a choice that night that I think about more than I should. The Gorakhpur Express was due to depart at 12:45 in the morning. If he held the train at the platform, the passengers on board, sealed in their compartments, would be killed by the cloud, which was now flooding into the station. If he released the train and waved it through, the train would carry the passengers out of the cloud into clean air south of the city. But the standard signaling procedure required him to confirm clearance from the next station down the line, which would take 15 minutes, by which time everyone on the platform, including himself, would be dead. He waved the train through without clearance. He waved through the next train as well, the Bombay Mail, when it arrived at 1:10. He stayed on the platform, holding his shirt over his face, alternately waving lanterns and vomiting blood, until he was physically dragged off the platform by a junior signalman at approximately 2 in the morning. He died of pulmonary edema in the Hamidia Hospital at 6:15 that morning. The 2 trains he saved between them carried approximately 1,200 passengers. He is buried in the Barabag Cemetery in Bhopal. There is no statue. The plaque on his grave reads, in Urdu, only his name, the dates, and the words, Station Master, Bhopal Junction. His widow, Khurshid Begum, lived until 2012 in a one-room flat provided by Indian Railways. She received a pension of 800 rupees a month, approximately $10 US. Outside the railway station, across the slums, the cloud did its work in the dark. Methyl isocyanate, when inhaled in lethal concentrations, kills by attacking the soft tissues of the respiratory system. The chemical reacts with the moisture in the lungs to form a series of urea derivatives that destroy the alveolar membrane within minutes. The lungs fill with fluid. The victim drowns in their own bed, in their own chest cavity, while their family beside them is doing the same thing. The faster reflex response is in the eyes. The MIC reacts with the moisture of the cornea and the conjunctiva to produce a chemical burn that, in a high concentration exposure, blinds the victim within about 90 seconds. The survivors of Bhopal woke in the dark, blind, drowning, unable to find the door of the room they had slept in every night of their lives. They crawled. They crawled out into streets that were full of other people crawling. The cloud was still rolling. It was still on the ground. Crawling did not get them out of it. It only kept them in it longer.
At the level where the concentration was highest,
the death toll from the night of the 2nd to the 3rd of December 1984 is the most contested number in the history of industrial accidents. The official Indian government figure for immediate deaths is 3,787. The figure was set by a magistrate's office in Bhopal in 1985 and has never been revised by the government. The actual figure, reconstructed by the Indian Council of Medical Research from hospital intake records, mortuary records, mass grave excavation records, and the door-to-door census conducted by volunteers in the affected slums between December 7th and January 15th, 1985, is between 15,000 and 25,000 dead within the first 72 hours. 500,000 people were exposed at concentrations sufficient to cause lasting medical injury. The Indian Council of Medical Research's longitudinal cohort study, which followed a representative sample of survivors from 1985 to 2015, established that the survivors of Bhopal show, 30 years after exposure, statistically significant elevated rates of chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, of fibrosis, of corneal opacity, of menstrual disorders, of stillbirth, of birth defects in the second generation, and of cancer of the lung, the larynx, and the stomach. The number of additional premature deaths attributable to the gas beyond the immediate 72-hour casualties is estimated by the Indian Council at between 20,000 and 30,000 additional deaths over the subsequent 30 years. The total mortality of the Bhopal disaster, taken across its full medical timeline, is therefore somewhere between 35,000 and 55,000 human beings. The chairman of the Union Carbide Corporation, Warren Anderson, age 63, flew to Bhopal on the 7th of December 1984, 4 days after the disaster, on a corporate jet, accompanied by Union Carbide India's managing director and 2 American attorneys. He was met at the Bhopal airport by the Madhya Pradesh State Police, who placed him under arrest on charges of culpable homicide not amounting to murder, criminal conspiracy, and violation of the Indian Penal Code Section 304, Part 2. He was transported to the Union Carbide guest house in Bhopal, which was designated as his place of detention, and held for approximately 6 hours. At 3:30 in the afternoon, he was released on a personal bond of 25,000 rupees, approximately $2,000 US, and driven directly back to the airport, where the corporate jet was waiting on the tarmac with engines running. He flew to Delhi, transferred to a commercial flight, and was in New York by the morning of the 8th of December. He never returned to India. The Indian government issued an extradition request to the United States in 1992 after Anderson failed to appear at his criminal arraignment in the Bhopal court of the Chief Judicial Magistrate. The United States Department of State, under the administration of George H.W. Bush, declined to act on the extradition request. The request was renewed in 1995, in 2003, and in 2011. It was declined each time. The legal grounds cited by the State Department in the 2011 response, which is the most recent publicly available, were that the Indian charges, quote, did not meet the dual criminality requirement of the United States-India extradition treaty. Warren Anderson lived, undisturbed, in Bridgehampton, on Long Island, in a 5-bedroom waterfront house that he purchased in 1991 for $1.2 million, until his death on the 29th of September 2014, age 92, of natural causes in a hospice in Vero Beach, Florida, where he had been spending his winters for the previous 20 years. The New York Times obituary ran in the business section. It described him as a, quote, executive who weathered the storm of the world's worst industrial accident. Union Carbide settled the civil litigation with the government of India in 1989 for $470 million. The settlement was negotiated under intense pressure from the United States State Department, which had threatened to withhold International Monetary Fund support to India if a settlement was not reached. The $470 million was distributed by the Indian government to approximately 570,000 registered claimants. At an average rate of, depending on category, between $500 and $2,500 per claimant. A widow of a man who had died in the gas received, on average, $2,200. A child blinded by the gas received, on average, $800. The legal fees and administrative costs of the settlement consumed approximately $160 million of the $470. The remaining funds were exhausted by 1995. Union Carbide Corporation was acquired by the Dow Chemical Company in 2001 for $10.3 billion. Dow has consistently maintained in every public statement and in every legal proceeding since the acquisition that the liabilities of Union Carbide for the Bhopal disaster were extinguished by the 1989 settlement and do not transfer to Dow. The site of the Bhopal plant was abandoned by Union Carbide India in 1986. The plant was never decontaminated. The 3,500 tons of waste chemicals that remained on the site, including the residues from tanks E611 and E619, were left in their original containers. The containers corroded. The chemicals, including the hexachloride byproducts of the carbamate process, leached into the soil. The soil leached into the groundwater. The groundwater is the drinking water for approximately 100,000 people in the slum communities adjacent to the plant. The Indian Council of Medical Research's 2004 study found mercury concentrations in the local groundwater at 6 million times the World Health Organization safe limit. The community continues to drink that water because the alternative drinking water supply promised by the Madhya Pradesh state government in 1998, in 2004, in 2012, and in 2018 has not been built. Children born to mothers in Jaiprakash Nagar in 2023, children whose mothers were not yet born when the disaster happened, whose grandmothers were exposed in 1984, show elevated rates of cerebral palsy, of cleft palate, of musculoskeletal deformity, and of intellectual disability at rates approximately 7 times the national average. The disaster is, in the most literal possible sense, still killing children 41 years after it ended. The criminal case against the 7 Indian executives of Union Carbide India Limited concluded in the Bhopal District Court on the 7th of June 2010. 26 years after the disaster. All 7 were convicted of negligence causing death. The maximum sentence was 2 years in prison and a fine of 100,000 rupees, approximately $2,000. All 7 were granted bail within hours of their conviction, pending appeal. None of them have served a day in prison. The lead defendant, Keshub Mahindra, the chairman of Union Carbide India in 1984, died in April 2023, age 99, in his home in Mumbai, with the appeal still unresolved. Warren Anderson is dead. Keshub Mahindra is dead. The plant is rusting. The water is poison. The settlement is spent. The State Department file is closed. Between 15,000 and 25,000 dead in 72 hours, then 20,000 more across 30 years. One memo titled Operating Cost Reduction, Phase 2. 0 foreign convictions. 0 days served by anyone, anywhere. For the worst industrial disaster in human history. And here, finally, we get to the part of this video that I find the hardest to talk about. Because every disaster I have described to you so far happened before the internet, before the warning systems we have now, before the satellite imaging and the regulatory inspections and the International Chemical Weapons Conventions and the OECD safety guidelines and the post-Bhopal industry self-regulation regime that was supposed to make sure that what happened in Madhya Pradesh on the night of the 2nd of December 1984 could never happen again, anywhere, ever. Because the entire world had now seen in living color on the evening news what a chemical plant operated by a cost reduction memo could do to a sleeping city. After Bhopal, the chemistry was supposed to be controlled, the storage was supposed to be regulated, the warnings were supposed to be heeded, the reports were supposed to be read. We had 36 years of supposed to. And then, on the 4th of August 2020, at 6:07 and 10 seconds in the evening, on a hot summer day on the eastern Mediterranean, in a port city of 2 million people, in the capital of a country where every government minister had received, between 2014 and 2020, at least one official written warning about the contents of a single hangar, a hangar that the customs authority had photographed, that the army had inspected, that the security service had reported on, that the Prime Minister himself had been briefed on by name and tonnage on the 20th of July 2020, 15 days before the explosion, at 6:07 and 10 seconds in the evening on the 4th of August. The same chemical that had blown a crater in BASF Oppau in 1921, that had vaporized the Halifax-Richmond district in 1917, and that had erased the Texas City waterfront in 1947, blew the city of Beirut in half. Beirut, the capital of Lebanon. The 4th of August, 2020, 6:07 and 10 seconds in the evening, and the chemical, for the third time tonight, is ammonium nitrate. The story of how 2,750 tons of Russian-manufactured, Georgian-flagged, Mozambique-bound ammonium nitrate ended up sitting in Hangar 12 of the port of Beirut for 6 years, 8 months, and 23 days in paper sacks on a wooden floor next to a stockpile of fireworks in a city of 2 million people is the story of an entire state choosing, at every level of every ministry, every month for almost 7 years, not to sign the form that would have moved it. The ship was called the MV Rosis. She was a 40-year-old general cargo vessel, Moldovan-owned through a Bulgarian shell company, registered under the Moldovan flag at the time of the relevant voyage, then reflagged Georgian, then deflagged entirely, sailed by a Russian captain named Boris Prokofiev, with a crew of 8 Ukrainians and 1 Russian. She was carrying 2,750 tons of ammonium nitrate, manufactured at the Rustavi Azot chemical plant in Georgia, purchased by an explosives broker in Maputo, Mozambique, named Fábrica de Explosivos de Moçambique, intended for the African mining industry. She left Batumi, Georgia, on the 23rd of September, 2013. She never arrived. In late September, Captain Prokofiev was instructed by the ship's owner, a Cypriot-based businessman named Igor Grichushkin, to make an unscheduled stop in Beirut to pick up additional cargo, heavy machinery, road-building equipment, a load that would supposedly cover Grichushkin's fuel costs through the Suez Canal. The Rosis arrived in Beirut on the 21st of November 2013. The additional cargo was loaded. When the loading crew attempted to secure the heavy equipment to the deck plates of the Rosis, which were 40 years old and had been welded back together more times than her hull plating, buckled under the weight. The Lebanese Port Authority's inspector, a man named Shafiq Meri, came aboard, took one look at the buckled deck and the rust on the bulkheads and the lifeboats with rotted davits, and declared the Rosis unseaworthy. The Rosis was impounded. Captain Prokofiev and his crew were ordered to remain on board because, under Lebanese maritime law, a ship under arrest cannot be left unattended. Grichushkin, the owner, declared bankruptcy from his office in Limassol approximately 3 weeks later, abandoning the ship, the crew, and the cargo. Prokofiev and 4 of his sailors lived on the Rosas for the next 10 months, on rationed food provided sporadically by the Lebanese Seamen's Mission, with no pay, with no working refrigeration, with the cargo of ammonium nitrate sitting in their lower hold the entire time. They were finally repatriated after a successful application to a Lebanese judge by their lawyer in August 2014. Prokofiev later told the BBC that he had spent 10 months sleeping above 2,750 tons of high explosive, and that, quote, "Every night I prayed the bags were dry." When the crew was released, the cargo, under the maritime arrest order, became the responsibility of the Beirut Port Authority. On the directive of Judge Jad Malouf, who issued the order on the 27th of June 2014, the ammonium nitrate was unloaded from the Rosas and transferred into Hangar 12, a warehouse in the central area of the port. Originally constructed in the 1960s for the storage of grain, Hangar 12 was a single-story concrete and corrugated steel structure, approximately 90 meters long by 40 meters wide, with a tin roof, large rolling doors at both ends, no climate control, no fire suppression system, no ventilation other than the doors themselves, and, on the day the ammonium nitrate was moved in, a small adjacent room used by the port's pyrotechnics importer to store fireworks awaiting customs clearance. The fireworks were never moved out. The ammonium nitrate was placed in the eastern half of the hangar in approximately 9,500 white-woven polypropylene sacks, each weighing about 300 kilograms, stacked 4 sacks high on wooden pallets. The hangar floor was concrete. The pallets were wood. The sacks, exposed to the humidity of the Mediterranean coast and the temperature swings of 7 Lebanese summers, did exactly what every chemical engineer in the world has known ammonium nitrate sacks will do since BASF Oppau in 1921. They absorbed water. They caked. They merged. They formed, by 2020, a single semi-solid mass of compromised, contaminated, organic-rich ammonium nitrate weighing approximately 2,750 tons. The warnings began immediately. The first formal written warning was filed on the 21st of February 2014 by the chief of the port's customs department, Shafiq Merhi, the same inspector who had declared the Rosas unseaworthy, to the office of the director of customs, Badri Daher. Merhi's letter described the cargo as, quote, hazardous and highly explosive, and recommended one of 3 actions: re-export to a willing buyer, transfer to the Lebanese armed forces for military use, or sale to a private explosives company. The letter requested a judicial directive to authorize one of these 3 options. The judicial directive was never issued. The same letter, with minor variations, was resent by the Customs Department to the Judiciary on the 5th of May 2014, on the 6th of May 2015, on the 20th of May 2016, on the 13th of October 2016, on the 27th of October 2017, and on the 25th of October 2017, 6 formal escalations from the Customs Department over 4 years, each one more urgent than the last, each one citing the previous unanswered letter as evidence that the cargo continued to deteriorate without action. In total, the post-disaster investigation by Human Rights Watch identified 21 separate official written warnings from various Lebanese state agencies between 2014 and 2020 regarding the ammonium nitrate in Hangar 12. The warnings were addressed to and received by the offices of the Director of Customs, 6 warnings, the Higher Defense Council of Lebanon, 3, the Ministry of Public Works and Transport, 4, the Ministry of Justice, 2, the General Directorate of State Security, 3, the Office of the Prime Minister of Lebanon, 2, and the Office of the President of Lebanon, 1. Every single warning was received. Every single warning was logged into the official correspondence registry of the receiving ministry. Every single warning was filed. Not one of them was acted upon. The reasons given in the testimony that emerged after the explosion
varied by ministry. Customs said it had no authority to dispose of impounded cargo without a judicial order. The judiciary said it had referred the matter to the executive. The Ministry of Public Works said the hangar was the responsibility of the Port Management Company. The Port Management Company said it was a customs matter. The General Directorate of State Security, in a memo dated the 20th of July 2020, 15 days before the explosion, sent a report directly to the office of Prime Minister Hassan Diab and to the office of President Michel Aoun, stating, in writing, that the ammonium nitrate in Hangar 12 was deteriorating, that the hangar doors had structural defects, that welders were currently working on those doors without proper safety procedures, and that, quote, in the case of any fire or accident at the location of these materials, the resulting explosion would have devastating consequences and would, with high probability, destroy the port of Beirut. The memo was received by both offices. The receipt is logged. The Prime Minister's office acknowledged delivery on the 21st of July, 2020. The President's office acknowledged delivery on the 22nd of July, 2020. Neither office responded. On the morning of the 4th of August, 2020, a maintenance crew was dispatched to Hangar 12 to repair the southern rolling door, which had a broken latch. The door had been on the maintenance backlog since 2019. The crew was assigned by the Port Maintenance Department because the crew's foreman, a Syrian welder named Ahmed Dumat, had been available that morning. The crew consisted of Dumat, 2 assistants, and a port supervisor named Joseph Nadaf. The work order specified arc welding repairs to the door frame. Arc welding produces sparks. Sparks landing on caked ammonium nitrate in the presence of fireworks stored in the adjacent room in a hangar with a temperature on a hot August afternoon of approximately 35 degrees Celsius are precisely the ignition source that the State Security Memo of the 20th of July had warned about in writing 15 days earlier. The welding sparks ignited a small surface fire in the western section of the hangar at approximately 5:45 in the afternoon. Dumat and his crew attempted to extinguish the fire with the building's only fire extinguisher, which was empty. They ran outside to call the Port Fire Service. A Beirut City fire engine and ambulance crew, 10 men in total, arrived at Hangar 12 at approximately 5:58. The team was led by a young paramedic named Sahar Fares, age 27, recently engaged. Her fiancé, Gilbert Karan, learned later that night by watching her colleague's video that Sahar had spent her last 7 minutes inside the burning hangar trying to find a water source. At 6:04 and 36 seconds in the evening, the fireworks in the adjacent storage room ignited. The sequence was captured on video by hundreds of cell phones across Beirut because the smoke column from the initial fire was visible across the entire city, and Beirut in 2020 was a city where cell phones came out of pockets at the first sign of anything unusual. The fireworks produced a series of bright white and red flashes for approximately 90 seconds. They are visible on every video from every angle. At 6:07 and 10 seconds, the 2,750 tons of ammonium nitrate in Hangar 12 detonated. The yield, calculated by seismologists at the German Research Center for Geosciences and confirmed independently by the United States Geological Survey, was between 500 and 1,100 tons of TNT equivalent, with the central estimate at approximately 800 tons. This was smaller than Halifax, smaller than Texas City, smaller than Oppau, but it occurred in the densest population center any of these explosions had ever struck. Beirut in 2020 had a metropolitan population of 2.1 million people, and Hangar 12 was located approximately 3 kilometers from the residential heart of the city. The blast wave arrived at the eastern Beirut neighborhoods of Karantina and Mar Mikhael within 4 seconds. It arrived at the central business district within 7 seconds. It arrived at the parliamentary district at approximately 12 seconds. The seismic signal registered as a magnitude 3.3 earthquake on the seismograph at Banes in the Lebanese mountains.
The blast was heard through the air in Cyprus, 240 kilometers away. The mushroom cloud rose to approximately 3 kilometers in altitude and was photographed by the European Space Agency's Sentinel-2 satellite from low Earth orbit at 6:09 and 4 seconds. 218 people were killed. 7,000 were wounded, of whom approximately 300 suffered permanent disability. 300,000 people were rendered homeless within the first 12 hours because the blast wave traveling through the unreinforced masonry of the Ottoman-era and French Mandate-era residential quarters of East Beirut collapsed roofs, blew out walls, and destroyed approximately 70,000 apartments. The Beirut hospitals, 4 of which were within 2 kilometers of the blast, St. George, Jitawi, Rosary, and Carantina, were themselves catastrophically damaged. St. George Hospital, a major teaching hospital, was rendered structurally unsafe and evacuated within 2 hours. The injured arrived at hospitals that were themselves in ruins and were treated, in many cases, in the parking lots, on stretchers improvised from doors and shutters, by doctors with glass shrapnel still in their faces. Among the dead were the entire 10-member fire and rescue team that had entered Hangar 12. Sahar Faris's body was identified by her engagement ring, which was still on her hand. The video that her fiancé, Gilbert Karan, watched that night, the video of his fiancé's last seconds, has been viewed on social media platforms several 100 million times. He has, in interviews since, asked that it be taken down. It has not been. The lead investigator assigned to the case by the Lebanese Court of Cassation was Judge Tariq Bitar, a senior magistrate with no political affiliation. Bitar was appointed in February 2021. He spent the following 28 months issuing summonses, requesting interviews, and attempting to question the senior officials whose names appeared on the receipts for the 21 warning letters. He summoned former Prime Minister Hassan Diab. He summoned former Minister of Public Works Ghazi Ziater. He summoned former Minister of Finance Ali Hassan Khalil. He summoned former Minister of Interior Nohad Makhnouk. He summoned the Director General of State Security Abbas Ibrahim. He summoned the Director of Customs Badri Daher. Every single one of them refused to appear. The legal grounds for the refusals varied: claims of parliamentary immunity, claims of executive privilege, claims of jurisdictional dispute, motions to remove Bitar from the case on grounds of alleged bias. Between February 2021 and October 2023, Judge Bitar's investigation was formally suspended by various Lebanese courts acting on motions filed by the defendant's lawyers on at least 7 separate occasions, for cumulative periods totaling approximately 14 months. In October 2023, he reopened the case unilaterally, charging 8 senior officials in absentia, including former Prime Minister Diab and Director General Ibrahim. The Lebanese public prosecutor, Ghassan Waidat, who was himself one of the officials Bitar wished to question, promptly issued a counterorder releasing the 17 people whom Bitar had detained over the previous 2 years, and filing travel bans against Bitar himself. As of the date of this episode, no Lebanese minister has been convicted of anything in connection with the explosion. No Lebanese minister has served a day in prison. The case remains, in the formal status of the Lebanese judicial system, active and under investigation, which is the diplomatic Beirut formulation for buried. Hangar 12 is now a crater. The crater is approximately 124 meters in diameter and 43 meters deep, partially filled with seawater from the harbor that flooded in through the breached quay wall. Around the crater, the port has been partially rebuilt with French and World Bank reconstruction money. The crater itself has not been filled. There is a small unofficial memorial at the southern edge, where the families of the dead come on the 4th of August every year and read out the 218 names. The current government of Lebanon does not attend. 218 dead, 21 warning letters, 3 branches of government, 0 convictions. This is where I stop. I have given you 6 explosions, 6 cities, across 114 years, 4 continents, and chemistries that range from coal dust to organic isocyanates to the same recurring fertilizer. I want to put one number on the screen for you before you close this video, because the number is the entire reason I made the episode. In 114 years across these 6 disasters, approximately 28,000 people died in the immediate blasts and gas releases. If we include the long-tail medical mortality from Bhopal alone, that number rises to between 45 and 60,000. The number of executives, ministers, captains, portmasters, customs directors, regulators, plant managers, or corporate officers who spent any portion of their lives in prison as a result of any of these disasters, summed across all 6 events, is 2. Both of them mid-level, both of them in Texas City, both of them on charges unrelated to the actual chain of decisions that caused the blast. Both of them released within 30 months. The number of senior decision makers, the people who signed the cost reduction memos, the people who approved the ratio changes, the people who ignored the inspection reports, the people who received the warning letters and filed them, who served prison time, in any country, in any of these 6 disasters, is 0. 0. That is not a coincidence. That is not a quirk of 6 different national legal systems happening to converge on the same outcome by chance. That is the system functioning exactly as it was designed to function, which is to convert the catastrophic consequences of cost-driven decisions made at the top of an organization into civil settlements that are paid out of corporate insurance, while the decision makers walk away with their pensions and their waterfront houses and, in some cases, their Nobel Prizes. And I want to leave you with the cleanest, most concrete fact in this entire video, which is the chemistry. 3 of these 6 disasters, Oppau, Texas City, and Beirut, were the same chemical, ammonium nitrate, stored in identical conditions, hot, humid, organic contaminated, in paper or wooden containers, adjacent to ignition sources, in storage volumes between 2,000 and 4,500 tons. The disaster of 2020 in Beirut was, in every chemical and operational respect, an exact replay of the disaster of 1921 in Ludwigshafen. The intervening 99 years, the safety bulletins, the international conventions, the engineering codes, the post-Bhopal regulatory framework, the OECD guidelines, the United Nations recommendations on transport of dangerous goods, none of it changed the storage practice of 2,750 tons of ammonium nitrate in a single warehouse in a major port city. There is today on the eastern coast of one continent or another, in a hangar that I cannot name because the inspection report has not yet been leaked, a quantity of ammonium nitrate or methyl isocyanate or compressed liquefied petroleum gas sitting in conditions that an engineer somewhere has already flagged in writing in a memo that has already been received by a ministry and filed and not acted upon. The signature line is blank. It will stay blank. And somewhere between 3 months and 7 years from now, that hangar or that ship or that tank will turn into a crater. The news will use the word accident. The families will be told it was nobody's fault. It was somebody's fault. It is always somebody's fault. The next signature is already overdue. My name is Blackwell. In the next episode, we are going to look at the products that were sold to you legally in your supermarket, in your pharmacy, in your child's nursery. Products that were tested, certified, and approved by the same regulatory architecture you just watched fail in 6 cities. And we are going to find out which of them are still on shelves today, and which were quietly withdrawn after the bodies started showing up. The signature line for that one is also blank. I will see you there.